Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special occasion and special teachings we have this morning. I'd like to start by introducing the Vajra Dakini Nunnery, because there will be some people who maybe aren't familiar. So it is a contemplative community in the Drikung Kagyu Tibetan Buddhist tradition. It was founded with the blessing and patronage of His Holiness Drikung Kagyu Jetseng Rinpoche. It is dedicated to peace, practice, and service. Vajra Dakini Nunnery is both a community of nuns and a place of compassion, training, and practice for the public, women and men, old and young. Currently, we offer programs in meditation online 4 days a week and are now beginning special in-person events in public spaces. Khenmo Drolma is the abbess of Vajra Dakini Nunnery. Since her ordination 25 years ago, she has trained with the foremost spiritual teachers of our time. In 2004, she was installed as a Khenmo, or abbot, by His Holiness Drikung Jetseng Rinpoche, becoming the first Westerner in her lineage to hold the responsibility. She started the Drikung Nuns Fellowship Program, assisting our Tibetan sisters to grow into their leadership role and to create His Holiness's vision for international nuns activities in Shravasti, India. She works continuously to establish the compassion teachings of the Dharma in the West. Ayya Santacitta is the co-founder of Aloka Vihara in California. She trained as a nun in England and Asia from 1993 until 2009, primarily in the lineage of Ajahn Chah, and has practiced meditation for over 30 years, receiving full Dakini ordination in 2011. Since 2002, she has also received teachings in the lineage of Dilko Khyentse Rinpoche. She is committed to Gaia as a living being and particularly interested in bringing wisdom traditions to the environmental movement. Since 2020, she has also offered teachings in German, her mother tongue, and is on her way to Austria to teach meditation in Europe. We will begin with the 4 Immeasurables Prayer, and then Ayya Santacitta will speak for about 40 minutes, including a meditation. After that, Khenmo will speak for about 30 minutes. They will respond to each other. And at the end, we will have questions from participants and discussion. So let us begin with the 4 Immeasurables Prayer. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion.
Okay, so can you hear me okay, Peggy? Yeah. So, thank you for inviting me. And, Khenmo has shown me a few of the thoughts and the questions which people have been bringing up and the theme of today. So I was thinking, to share with you a guided meditation on the elements, which comes from the early Buddhist tradition. And gives us a direct experience of emptiness, I would say, because we can, in this guided meditation experience the different qualities of the four primary elements: earth, water, fire, and wind, and also the space element. And through this direct experience, we can develop what we call wisdom, because wisdom is experience understood. And that can only be happening, through our personal individual experience. We can't get wisdom from another being. We have to have that experience in our own body and mind. And, the Buddha's teaching are very pragmatic and very practical. They are not telling us what life is or what something is, but it gives us tools so we can experience it for ourselves. And I think, the meditation on the elements is particularly timely right now in this time of, great environmental unraveling. And, we are all in this together. And I think it's a good idea to use all of these difficult experiences, with the pandemic being one of many, using it as a wake-up call, really, to understand more deeply that we are not separate from each other, not separate from the environment, not separate from planet Earth, not separate from the cosmos itself, which is, nothing else but emptiness in constant display all around us, and we have to learn to really hear that, to really see that, to really sensitize our minds and hearts to that constant teaching which we are receiving. If we can really listen to hear, life speaking for itself. But we are so, distracted usually that we can't hear it. And this, meditation on the elements is one skillful means, one tool, how we can sensitize our minds and hearts to hear what life is telling us all the time. And I think, all instructions which we receive are means, to hear life speaking to us. And the example today comes from early Buddhism and is part of the first, teachings on meditation in the Pali Canon, which is called the Four Satipatthana, or the four establishments for the development of mindfulness. And it's a very, very simple template which underlies all meditation instructions of all three yanas, really. And the first establishment of mindfulness is body, kaya in Pali. Second one is feeling tones, vedana. Third one is mind states, chitta. My name Santacitta means peaceful mind. And the fourth one is dhammas, or understanding the conditionality of all experiences, understanding and seeing the connections, and seeing those connections clearly, and seeing the lawfulness of those connections is liberating. And so those four satipatthana are the basics of the Buddhist meditation teachings, and they show us emptiness. If we can really sensitize our minds and train our minds to be able to pay attention in this way, then what we realize first is impermanence. And then if we really allow that truth, to come really close, it will become clear to us as emptiness. And in the early Buddhist teaching, that's called anatta, or not self. And then in the later teachings, we call it emptiness. So that's like the central realization we need to have in order to liberate the mind from all limiting beliefs. And it's the same in all three yanas, and there's a different, take on it in all three. And the Vajrayana has a particular huge amount of skillful means, in order to train the different characters of people with different propensities and so on. But it all is based on that very clear and simple, pragmatic and practical truth of impermanence. That everything is in constant flux and everything is in constant change. And it doesn't make any sense to hold on to that which is constantly changing. And then the result of that is the insight into not self, because that which is constantly changing can't be called a self, because it doesn't exist from its own side. It's a coming together, it's a process. So let us, start with the meditation now on the elements, to just have a real direct experience. And I have that actually from the Kachi tradition, comparing this illusory body with a mount or with a riding animal, which we borrow from nature for a certain time, and we look after it and we use it. And then when it comes, to an end, we give it back. And if we have trained ourselves in looking at the body in this way, then it will be much easier, to give it back when the time comes. So, becoming aware that this body is just a mount for consciousness, which we have borrowed from nature. That's what this meditation can bring home to us. And for example, in the early Buddhist text of the Majjhima Nikaya, is said, that which you perceive as a person consists of the 6 elements. Ultimately, there is no person here. Person is a mere concept. And, when I give those instructions now, there's no need, for you to effort in any way to try to have a particular experience. Just simply listen to my words and then allow, your mind to respond however it can. There's no need to force anything. So find a posture you can sustain for about, 30 minutes. It doesn't matter, if you're sitting on the chair, on a cushion, on a couch. What's important is that your mind, that your spine is erect, your body is erect, so that the air can flow in and out unhinderedly. And allowing the mind to rest on the body, just as the body rests on the cushion or the chair. And then, bringing to mind your intention, your aspiration. Why have you come today? Why do you want to meditate? And then we can start with earth element. And the clearest we can experience earth element, which the quality of it is hardness and structure. And you just, press your teeth together and feel that hardness. Not thinking about hardness, but experiencing hardness. Or you can also touch your fingernails. That's what hardness is. Just simply hardness. And the whole body is permeated by earth element. And we can particularly also feel it in the bones. And we're going to start with a body sweep now. Starting our body scan, starting from the top of the head and trying, to experience hardness in the skull. Earth element, head. And then sweeping down the neck, earth element. And just let it come to you. You don't need to do anything. First, just listening and paying attention. Shoulders, earth element, hardness. Upper arms, earth element, hardness. Lower arms, earth element. And hands, earth element, hardness. Torso, with the spine and the rib cage, earth element. Pelvis, earth element. Upper legs, earth element. Lower legs, earth element. And the feet, earth element. The whole body is permeated by earth element. Earth element internally and earth element externally, the mountains and the stones outside are exactly the same. There's no difference between internal and external earth element. Earth element is empty, empty of a self. And if we don't, take in earth element from outside through eating for 1 or 2 months, this body shuts down. It can't live without a constant supply of earth element. And then we become aware of the seat or the cushion, which is external earth element. And the feeling of gravity, which pulls us towards the planet, which is also earth element. And then in order for earth element to be, hanging together, to be not just quicksand, there needs to also be water element. Water element stands for cohesion, for liquidity, for wetness. And our body consists about 75% of water element. And we can experience it particularly, in the mouth, the wetness of the mouth. But also the whole flesh of the body is permeated by water element in the form of many different liquids. And we can now sweep up, from the bottom of the feet, experiencing water element in the flesh, which is between the bones and the skin is the flesh. So water element, feet. And lower legs, water element. Upper legs, water element. Pelvis, water element. Torso, water element. Hands, water element. Lower arms, water element. Upper arms, water element. Shoulders, water element. Neck, water element. Head, water element. The whole body is permeated by water element. Water element internally and water element externally as the lakes and rivers and oceans, the rain is not different. Water element internally and water element externally is exactly the same. Simply water element. Water element is empty, empty of a self. And if we don't drink for 3 days, the body starts to shut down. You can't live. And then the next element is the fire element, which comes from the sun. Either to direct the heat from the sun, or the food which is grown in the sun, which is eaten and digested and produces also fire element. And we can experience that fire element either in the mouth, the warmth, or under our arms, or also generally on the skin, where the skin meets the outer temperature in the room. We can be aware of the temperature, heat or cold. We can start sweeping down from the top of the head, becoming aware of fire element. Neck, fire element. Shoulders, fire element. Upper arms, fire element. Lower arms, fire element. Hands, fire element. Torso, fire element. Pelvis, fire element. Upper legs, fire element. Lower legs, fire element. And feet, fire element. The whole body is permeated by fire element. Fire element internally and fire element externally are exactly the same. Fire element is empty, empty of a self. And as human beings, we can, for an unlimited time span, we can live only in a certain temperature range, which is about 4 to 35 degrees Celsius or 38 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And everything above and below that, leads to illness if we're there for too long. And the body shuts down again. it's dependent on a certain temperature range. Either, water starts to freeze or to evaporate, and then the body shuts down. And warmth and heat is actually, actually just temperature. It's just movement. And movement is wind element. And we are particularly aware of wind element through the breathing process, expansion and contraction of the chest area. And everything which is in motion in the body, the blood circulation, the breath, all the elements, the oscillation of the cells. It's this constant motion. Some of it is so subtle that we are not conscious of it. Becoming aware of the breathing process, constant change. And if we don't breathe, for about 3 minutes, the body shuts down and dies. And then it starts to disintegrate. So this meditation on the elements shows us very clearly the dependence of the body on everything else. And it also shows us that there is no real internal and external. This is just a certain way of looking. Looking of a mammal, which we call like a human being, experiencing itself in the environment and looking in this manner. Yes, there is an internal and external, but it is not a constant internal and external. It's a constant exchange of taking in elements and letting them go through the food, through the breathing process, through drinking, going to the bathroom, sweating, crying. There's so many ways, how we excrete elements. The skin itself is an organ which also, excretes elements. So to really learn to see those subtle truths which are with us every moment, but we don't tend to look at it. We don't tend to pay attention to it. And this meditation is there in order to bring that home clearly. And then we can also become aware that we are sitting in space. And there's also, space inside the body, the cavities, the mouth, the eyes, the ears, the chest area, the womb. In each cell. emptiness. So you're being aware of the space around the body, which permeates the whole room and doesn't end at the walls of the room, but goes on endlessly. We live in an expanding universe. Listening to that space, so to say. The silence. So that's the fifth element. The earth element, water element, fire element, wind element, and space element. So whenever the mind wanders off into thinking about anything, we're bringing it back to listening to the space. And allowing the mind to open up. And then we can, drop the space, perception of space, and becoming aware of that which knows the space, which knows all the elements, knowing itself, which is also immeasurable, just like the space. Otherwise, wouldn't be able to know space. So dropping the object and subject being aware of itself, like making a U-turn, so to say. That's the sixth element, consciousness. Knowing itself. The subject knowing itself. Being the knowing, resting as knowing. And that's what we call, the refuge of Buddha. And also dropping, any notion of I or me, knowing, just knowing, no need to have anything else attached to it. No need for selfing. Just knowing. And then, we slowly come to the end of the meditation, and, it's impermanent as well. Even, when the mind is really spacious and, liberated from any selfing for some time. When the time comes to bring an end to it, then we can do that too. The temporary liberation of the mind. And then we're paying attention to, this is also impermanent. Even it is a very, pleasant experience. When it's time to let it go, we just let it go. By knowing, it's futile to attach, to hold on to that which is constantly changing. And allowing, that insight into impermanence, washing away the clinging, washing away the craving. By paying attention to endings. Paying attention to that we usually don't pay attention to. We just want to get on to the next thing, to the next thing. But in this case, we pay real attention to this is coming to an end. And then just like letting it go, giving it back to nature, Dhamma. Just like the body, has to be given back at the end of its lifetime. So every, object needs to be let go of every moment. So just coming back to the body, experiencing the body, coming back, and then, opening your eyes, opening and closing the eyes a few times maybe. Just taking a bit of time to ground yourself.
Thank you. It was wonderful to experience that meditation. So it was perfect for how I was thinking about what was arising for all of us in this moment. And I'll even open that a little more. So I wanted to start by recalling some of the reflections I had when I had cancer. I was thinking back to what time in my life was similar to what we're going through now. And about 30 years ago, I had cancer. And when you get a cancer diagnosis, all of a sudden your life stops. All the plans you had just evaporate. And you go into the similar isolation of receiving treatment. And when you're receiving treatment, your immune system is greatly weakened. So you are even more isolated socially. And what was interesting was to see that experience revealed really what is precious about life. So in the recognition that life can be short, I came to a greater respect of the preciousness of each moment, a greater respect and care for those who were helping me and those in my life that were dear to me. And as I prepared to leave that quarantine and resume activity in the world, I could see that that space of being quarantined allowed me to see lots of assumptions and beliefs that were limiting how I wanted to use this precious life. So the fear of a short life or the recognition of impermanence allowed me to conquer some of the fears I had about security and needing security. So within 6 months of completing treatment, I was in India studying, and then within a year I was ordained. So I left the cultural security, the societal security, and was able to build a life that reflected what I wanted to know in this moment of time that I had alive, and put me on a path to examining those questions through the Dharma. So this collective experience that we've been through is similar. We all stopped our lives. Everything came to a halt. All the futures we had planned evaporated. And as we're starting to move towards the door again, we can look to see what was revealed for us in this period of time. What is limiting to us as humans, limiting our consciousness, and what kind of a life do we want to build? We have no idea if there'll be another virus occurring anytime. We have no idea if we'll catch the virus tomorrow. We have no idea who among us will live or who will die, whether it's the folks in the grocery store or spiritual teachers. So huge cultural shifts happened during this quarantine. We were all able to see what the planet looked like. Delhi, that was so dense with pollution that planes wouldn't land there anymore, all of a sudden was clear of that brown ozone-like fog. There were pictures of Paris being able to see clearly again. So we know something about the environment that we were trying to hide from ourselves. If we look at what we learned particularly in the US, we learned a lot about racism. There was so much about that we were trying to hide from ourselves, and we could not escape facing directly while we were in quarantine. Everyone saw George Floyd die. Other cultures had other revelations. Our friends in Canada are really looking directly at their relationships with the indigenous friends, indigenous brothers and sisters right now. There are all kinds of revelations that we were able to see. So now the question is, what do we do with this information, and how do we walk out the door, and what are we building in our new life? And can we conquer the fears that were driving us to numb ourselves or driving us to blind ourselves? Has what we have seen about life enough that we can keep our eyes open as we move through the world? His Holiness has a wonderful quote that I reflect on all the time. And you know how we put important things on our email signature. This has been on my email signature for probably 20, 30 years as well. All things, all beings are interrelated, interconnected, and interdependent. I remember being in the assembly when he said that, and really thinking about those three simple words and how they're like a bell ringing through me. And then as I think of what I experienced in quarantine as an older person with a weak immune system, and as someone who has a degree of class privilege in the sense that I'm supported and I have a home, I was totally dependent on other people to survive. When I think of all the folks who went to work at the supermarket and how interrelated and interconnected I am with each and every one of them, with their families, with the safety of their families affecting their safety, affecting their ability to keep food supplies going. All the folks that might have been anonymous now were personal. The FedEx man was personal to me. I could see his stress developing. I could see his stress in terms of how he delivered packages. I could see it in his facial expression when he was delivering packages. So a layer of shielding dropped away in the rare actual personal interactions that I had. Like many of you, I was only going to the grocery store intermittently, and I constructed a very tight bubble of people I would go for walks outdoors with. And at the same time, I was dependent on multitudes. In the same time, my spiritual well-being was supported by hundreds of invisible people. Very quickly, the Drikung Kagyu sent out particular spiritual practices for us to do, healing practices for the world and all the different populations that were affected. But I was acutely aware, because I worked for His Holiness on a couple of special projects, that I was dependent now on all the people who were working on this special project, how to translate the text on practices for times of epidemics, how to distribute them on the web, all the invisible friends in all the different centers who were making all that information accessible and available so quickly, all the people who searched for exactly the old tankas to get the pictures of the aspect of Tara dressed in leaves, or Parnashabari, the great protector for the times of epidemics. So all this information flowing came through lots and lots of hidden people, and those same Dharma centers were sustaining His Holiness's health. And then as I was contemplating as the pandemic was moving from country to country, I thought, as I've grown older, all my nieces have nephews, and nephews have married. So now I'm personally connected to Mexico. And I was watching what was happening in Mexico City and all of the circumstances of COVID there. I was watching the Dharma Center in Taiwan, where I had stayed just recently. What were their circumstances? And we're very connected. We're an affiliate of the Nunnery in India. So we know how India greatly suffered during the pandemic. So there was a global personalization in the same way there was a local personalization. And I'm sure all of you were experiencing that in the same time through your families and all the ways you were getting sustaining information and support during the pandemic. So in our quarantine, we were also experiencing a different kind of interconnection with the environment, with the planet, and with the global community. And what was interesting was there was something else that was going on in a hidden way that I wasn't particularly aware of until some of our Sangha were helping us prepare for this session. So at the same time, we were experiencing more interconnection. We were building up habits of sealing ourselves off. So these bubbles that we created were an intensification of the already kind of human experience of our self-referencing. So we controlled all of our relationships in a different way. We controlled the bubble. We had so much interaction, but it was virtual. So it wasn't in-person communication. So in virtual communication, if we choose, we can cut it off in an instant. We can just press a button and hang up, or press a button and leave the meeting. We don't have to take as much in-person responsibility for the reactions and responses of our words, of our facial expressions. And when we went to the grocery store, we were wearing masks. So facial expressions were hidden. So we had such a mixture of experience and unconscious building of another kind of sealing ourselves off. And particularly as we were moving through the meditation on the elements, there was a whole different experience of the air. We became terrified of air. In communal spaces, all of a sudden it wasn't safe. So a fear that wasn't present now is present relative to air. So here we are. To some degree, the treatment isn't finished, but to some degree, we're opening our door again. And it's a time of assessment and self-reflection on what we have learned, both good and bad. And how are we going to move forward with all of this new information? So I want to work with a meditation specifically about that. And I'm going to invite you, I'm just warning you ahead of time, I'm going to invite you to move around your space and move from the virtual. So building on what Ayya Santacitta just offered us, I want to take that a little further. So let's start by sitting, aware of the elements, going right back into that meditation, aware that it's been our human habit, just our normal, vulnerable human habit, to see all of our experience as my experience. I am feeling my body, I am feeling my air in the room. I am seeing it if this is safe for me, seeing if I like or don't like this. And I want to soften that shield that we have between what we consider inside and outside. So in addition to our experience of the elements, I'm going to invite you just to reflect on your senses and open your senses right now as you're seated in your space. Open your sense visually and visually connect with anything that is alive. If you can see a plant in your room, if you can see out the window, if there are other people in your space, looking away from the computer to things that are alive in your space. Right now in Maine, it's the time when a lot of insects enter the house. So there are lots of little live beings, spiders, and particularly ants right now. Also your sense of hearing. I can hear birds outside my house. And very, very subtly, I can hear traffic, other human beings moving around the world. So although I keep myself intentionally blind or sealed, it's only because I'm ignoring the permeability of those imaginary shields or psychological shields. The sounds I hear are not either inside or outside. I'm connected to those winged voices. Similarly, fragrance. We begin the morning here with a little incense. You might have some flowers. And certainly I can feel the air moving on my skin. I can feel the heat of sitting next to somebody. So see if you can move from that quality of being sealed in a self-referencing, plastic-wrapped being to a net that has soft boundaries and is totally permeable by the life we're with. Let's take a minute for that. And now I'm going to invite you to actually walk over to some being that's alive in your space. You can open a window and look outside. We have lots of chipmunks outside here. If you have other people in your space, open a door, open a window, and really connect with that living pulse. And aware that that other being treasures their life, their awareness, their precious moment on earth. I don't have to look too hard to find a corner with a little spider somewhere. I only have to drop one little piece of food and there's a mound of ants. Each and every one has a mind, an awareness of their life, their environment. One of the wonderful teachings from our tradition is Buddha nature. Every being with mind, human, animal, insect, birds, all beings that possess awareness. We certainly are questioning now if the planet and plants have awareness. There's new proof about that. So all beings with awareness have Buddha nature. And our Buddha nature and their Buddha nature is the same. We have the same potential for realization. So each precious life has the same Buddha nature as our own. And any disregard for any form of life is disregarding Buddha nature, the same as our own. So again, with your eyes not so much on the computer, but towards a window or towards a door or towards a plant or any live being in your space, really take on a contemplation of softening to the equal Buddha nature. The experience of that being is just as afraid of pain, in the same way wanting happiness, wanting the requisites of nourishment, wanting freedom from suffering, in just the same way you do. There's a sense of equality because awareness has the capacity of Buddha nature, or has and holds Buddha nature by its very being awareness. So soften into our sameness in a direct, not a virtual experience. Let's sit with that for a minute. Now I'm going to invite you to move again. I want you to walk right to the front door of wherever you're living and open the door and pause. And really allow yourselves to experience walking towards the door and opening the door with your habit energy of being sealed. I've got to get to the next place. I don't have to see suffering to the left or right of me. And then pause in a tenderness and allow that seal to drop and allow yourself to be permeated by everything you can see around as you open the front door, or if you're in an apartment, opening the window and looking outside. Really look at that doorstep as a pause into tenderness to meet all the Buddha nature life forms, as opposed to the habit of sealing off, hurrying to get to the next event that's going to purely benefit me in a way I like, as opposed to opening the door, softening in tenderness, and seeing all the Buddha nature beings surrounding you. Returning to our cushions, let's take in that moment of softening and opening to all the Buddhas around us, all the baby Buddhas, with the same aspiration of happiness and liberation. And really think about the force of those habits of sealing off. I'm going to just jump in the car and get from one place to the next, opposed to opening, softening, and tenderness. I'm going to walk through the crowd without seeing anything disturbing, opening, softening, tenderness. We can use this incredible time of learning and carrying the open softening that we were able to do online in our sanghas, in our realization of interconnection into the physical world as we open our doors. So now we have a moment that we can respond, you and I together, and then I'm going to suggest that people type in questions into the chat stream, and then Peggy sort of organize similar questions together.
That's a very beautiful way of kind of continuing on with what I offered, before the meditation on the elements, by, getting up basically and looking outside and seeing how that is really, when I was saying about allowing life to speak for itself, that's a very good way of making that a little bit more tangible, how you were guiding us. Yeah.
And I really appreciated the felt experience of the elements, bringing that home as we were doing the body scans.
And also when you were saying, experiencing, all living beings like are on a way to Buddhahood, basically. So they, the plant over there, or the ants in the sink or so on, being all like potential Buddhas, on their way. Yeah, it's a very good reminder, that we are not better than, or brings it more home that the care, which is appropriate for all of those beings.
I often think of you in California. I know you're on your way to Europe, but with the fires.
Yeah.
And thinking of all of the what the animals are experiencing in the fires, because they have no way of seeing the bigger picture and knowing what's going on. All of a sudden, their environment is engulfed. And our friend Venerable Gawa Khandro in Canada, who experienced the town near her in 15 minutes burning down.
The whole town.
The whole town. That sense of appreciating the suffering and considering the suffering as my own, as an interconnected being instead of a separate being.
It also makes you much more humble, and much more aware of, the vulnerability which we all share. And it could be us, and that can really help to bring more equilibrium in our minds and our lives, not to get so carried away by success or failure, but just to come to the middle and see, that this is just part of the human experience, and we just don't know what's going to happen next.
The hardest thing after cancer was to remember what I had learned. To remember that impermanence gave me courage. And I hope we can take what we've learned about interconnection and impermanence as we build our imaginary futures again.
Yeah.
Let it temper what we see and do.
I also say to people, like to have total faith in impermanence. Whatever happens, if the best thing ever happens, if you remember this is impermanent, it will help you to stay grounded and not get lost, in pride or becoming kind of careless, because of the good fortune. And if bad fortune happens to us, not getting carried away in total depression, because we know that is also impermanent. It's just such a simple thing to remember, and that all beings, plants or ants or whatever, they are all on the way, including us. And everybody, doesn't want pain, yeah, and everybody is looking for some circumstances to flourish. And I think if we, if we think like that, incline the mind like that, it it creates that sense of connectedness, and that brings in like a sense of enrichment, because we feel we are not alone in this. And then if there's a sense of enrichment, letting go is much easier from a sense of having enough, from a sense of not being really, a separate entity in a hostile universe, but actually being part of this very vast process. Gives a sense of enrichment, really, which, when you were saying to look out and just take off that plastic wrap, because that plastic wrap makes us feel poor and separate. Whereas if we are that net-like kind of experience, makes us feel connected, and we are porous. There's an exchange happening, yeah.
That's such a beautiful word, enrichment. It's another quality that allows us to conquer the fear.
Yeah.
It takes, we have to have the courage to take off the plastic wrap.
Yeah.
And when we think of enrichment, as opposed to what am I going to get out of this, how are we all experiencing this?
Yeah, it's just so counterintuitive in terms of what the consumerist daily messaging we get over so many different devices, which always tell us we need to buy more, we need to get more, we need to be more because we are not enough. And then we start to believe it, really. So it's we need some very concerted effort to go against that conditioning. And I think that's what what has been said all along since over 2,600 years in this teaching, because it's always been like that. Only in these times it's particularly insidious.
We have there's so many people have a much more artificial security built for them.
Yeah.
It certainly was revealed how artificial that security is.
And in itself, it also creates, like, for example, as we know that the pandemic was connected with the environment and with changes there, So in the wake of creating this artificial security, we create so much havoc. It's just so crazy. It's amazing. And, it's not about necessarily succeeding in fixing it, but knowing where it's coming from and not being so invested into it. That's the point, really, isn't it?
Oh, I think that's a wonderful expression. We were so invested in our futures.
Mm.
And then we saw it was a dream that we created. And now we're invested in a different way. And it's so tempting to go back to the process of investing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As opposed to open tenderness and just the moment.
Yeah. And also, being clear, it's not about things, it's about qualities, which we can focus on to develop qualities of the heart and of the mind rather than investing in things, which are so insecure. Whereas the qualities of heart and mind, they will be with us. Even the body, we have to give back the body because we die. The qualities stay with us. It's the best investment we can make, for future happiness, really. And present happiness. It's just really the best way to spend energies in that way. And then we need a certain amount of stuff, in order to live. But it doesn't need to be all kind of the best of the best.
showing my friend, how we've created Liberation House from the $5 Salvation Army stuff.
Yeah. And beautiful stuff. We're sitting on a very nice sofa from...
It's a Habitat for Humanity sofa.
Yeah.
They have a resale shop here.
That's a beautiful way, of living that instant.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good time to switch over to questions and discussions. So again, I invite you to put some questions in the chat room. I think more folks will be able to participate that way. I'm going to switch to the gallery.
Mm-hmm. Great. Nice to see everybody.
So, yeah.
Yeah, if and if you don't have a question, you could also just make a comment, right? Or share some of your own insights. It's not that we have all the answers anyway.
So there are not so many people. It's if you want to go ahead and just raise your hand, we can, since nobody's typing in the chat room. Thoughts, inspirations, insights from
Joanne.
Okay, Joanne.
We can't hear you, Joanne.
I always do that, excuse me. Good morning. Ayya Santacitta, I really enjoyed your meditation, specifically about how we in our physical bodies move through this earth, so sensitive to the degrees of temperature, hot and cold. I recently was just in Florida. I returned yesterday and it's extremely hot down there. It was like 90 something, but it felt like 100 and something. And I was very challenged by that. And so then to hear you reflect on that this morning, it really opened up more compassion about how our earth is warming and how so many plants, animals, insects, human beings are affected by that imbalance. So thank you for sharing that in your meditation.
Thank you.
I was doing poem prayers for the sea life that were boiled in the heat, extreme heat.
Yeah.
Pictures in the paper from the West Coast.
Yeah, thank you.
Carol.
I just also wanted to say that I very much enjoyed the meditation on the elements, and particularly the idea that there's a permeability between us and between nature, which is actually easier to feel than it is between people, um, uh, particularly since we've been in our little pods. And I think that making that connection of the pod being permeable as well, you could actually utilize your whole pod to extend out in a way. And I think there are many teachings, Buddhist teachings about the Tonglen particularly comes to mind, but I really think that it's important to, again, using your words, have the courage to extend out in different kinds of ways than we've done before, and to think about extending out in different kinds of ways. And I think the meditation and both of your conversation actually gives one pause to have the courage to extend out in that way. So thank you.
John.
Yeah, needed, yes. Good morning from New York. I've been experimenting the past couple of weeks with feeding insects in the form of not reflexively smacking a mosquito if it decides to have some lunch on me. Yesterday I was in the back bay. I live by the ocean, and I was in the back bays, and we have a tremendous, this is the time of year where we have green flies, and they don't just take a tiny bit. They gnaw at you and sit there, and I was bleeding all over. And it was an interesting experiment. I have to say, there's nothing romantic about it. It hurts, and it was a good meditation to try to maintain my patience, to get to a certain point where the green flies will allow you, that they're not like the typical flies. You can literally pick them up and remove them from your body without hurting them, as far as I know. But I'm just sharing with that. I've been trying to extend my Bodhisattva vow to its natural next level, and I'm willing to do it, but I have to say, it's not romantic. It hurts.
When we received the Bodhisattva vow in Taiwan, they burn little incense things on your head to connect you to the fact that it hurts. And are you willing to step into the space where you're willing to go into painful situations?
I don't know if you can see what's on my nose. This is the friend that I invited into meditation. And of course, in Canada, we have plenty of chewing, biting insects, but this is not one of them. This one has no mouth parts and doesn't live long, but they emerge from our lake in the tens of thousands over a relatively short period of time.
What are they reading?
It's a shad fly, but I think you might know them better as a mayfly. Lots of lakes have mayflies, which are in the larval stage food for fish.
Mm-hmm.
And they're quite harmless, except that they gather, they will cover windows and billboards, and then they fall off and they smell. And so there are some unpleasant aspects, but this is one insect that it's fairly easy to make friends with.
There's somebody who's raised their hand, Eileen Frazier.
Hi. Thank you, both of you, for the meditations. The first meditation, I never really looked at myself like that before in terms of the elements. So it was very instructive to feel myself as fire and water and space and air. It's very interesting, and I found it did open me to a certain degree. And Khenmo, this idea of going to the window or the door, it was very interesting for me as well. What I have to say is I like the bubble, okay? I've enjoyed the bubble. In many respects, it's reinforced what I always do. There's a false sense of protection in the bubble. There's like this comfort in it to a certain degree. And so I do have some trepidation and anxiety about going out into the world. And it, of course, it has a shadow side because the bubble is also a prison. And I feel like I'm walking with my own little prison around me wherever I go. It's very interesting. Yet when I opened the window today, when we were doing that exercise, there was a little mosquito on the screen. And when I opened the window, the mosquito was released into the air. And what I noticed was I felt better. I felt that closing and tightening begin to be less afraid. So I guess what the exercises kind of taught me was I am afraid of the world in many respects, of pain, I guess is what it is. It's a fear. But by opening the window, opening the door, and looking, the seeing may be less scared. So I found that interesting, that opening creates courage. So for very experiential exercises that I found helpful to me. So thank you, both of you.
What Ayya Santacitta said, the very first statement about wisdom being learned.
Experience understood.
Experience understood. We so underestimate that.
Yeah.
You know, and so these little things like going and opening the door, you know, it's such a key because we think knowledge is coming and wisdom is coming from books, from great teachers, not something so simple as opening our door and allowing that softening and permeating wave to happen in our own moment, in our own experience.
And also, you know, being courageous doesn't mean we don't experience fear, but being courageous means, you know, we experience fear, but we still keep on experimenting and making the fear is just part of the experiment, you know. So it's not about not experiencing fear. It's like normal, you know, to experience fear of new things or things we haven't done for quite some time and so on. But do not stop there because of the fear, because fear is just simply aversion, you know, and to recognize that and just let it be there, you know, and then make a reality check and see for yourself, is that fear actually really appropriate? And then it matches proper way, you know, through experimenting. So I think that's really important. Fear is just part of the game.
Okay, Sylvia and then Elizabeth. Sylvia, did you had your hand up a minute ago?
Okay, there. Okay.
Yeah.
So right before the practice started, the phone rang, and it was my friend telling me our cabin vacation in the mountains will be cut short because her dog is dying.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sat down for the practice this morning, and a few minutes into it, my cat comes leaping in the front door, basically telling me that she's running away from a stray cat that's chasing her. And she does this 2 more times during the practice. And then finally, I thought, this is a terrible practice for me. I cannot really get into the emptiness of this. But then I thought, the fact that you're even still sitting here after all these things have disturbed your practice is a testament to your commitment. So don't worry about it, you know. So I didn't have the kind of practice you all must have had this morning, but I had experience, you know.
You don't know what other people in their bubbles are experiencing. And, Sylvia, there's that wonderful Milarepa story that I bet you can find about when the dog and the deer was being chased by the dog and the hunter, and just Milarepa's response. So I recommend remembering that song or rereading that song.
Okay.
Elizabeth.
I can't hear you, Elizabeth. You have to unmute yourself, Elizabeth. Take your time. Now, maybe now, huh?
Yeah, I found it. Okay.
Perfect.
Yes. I was thinking about what you were saying at the beginning about the body and the mind and how we use it and how interdependent they are. But I have a question about those who are suffering a lot. For example, those with COVID and people who can't breathe. It's like that must be terrifying. And in those, and Khenmo, I'm sure, has something to say, that when you're in that moment, what can you do? I mean, I haven't had that experience, but I know this experience will eventually come to all of us when we're dying, and it could be either mental or physical. And I guess we see it in people all the time. If we visit them in hospitals and so on, there is a tendency to think they're doing nothing. Their life is, from a spiritual point of view, is over or something. So I wonder if you have some comments to make about, yes, you were talking about we're all on the path. And it's like we can have the perhaps mistaken impression that the path is over for some people at a certain point, even though their body is still there. So could you, either of you, address this a bit?
I mean, the path is never over, isn't it? The path is like endless path.
Right. So let's say you can't breathe, so you're panicking. What does a person do?
You know, then you know how well trained you are or are not. So if you have been practicing continuously, then whatever arises, you're aware of what's going on without the fear or the panic, for instance, if you can't breathe. And certainly as we come to the moment of our own deaths, we ask our Sangha members to be with us, to just remind us this is the element of fire ceasing when our feet start to be cold. This is the time of the water element ceasing when our mouth stops producing saliva. So that there is that experience, but without the fear. And then,
or maybe there might be even fear, you know, but we are not kind of getting lost in it, you know, not panicking.
Yeah.
For example, because panicking is like a defense against fear, you know, but it's not very appropriate, because you just need more energy. If you're panicking, you need more breath, you know. So
right. With
the moment of death teachings is, you know, as each of those elements disappears, then there's a moment of pure awareness. And if you're caught up in the fear of it, you miss that moment of pure awareness. So even in the midst of the physical pain and the actual process of dying, even there is the potential for a moment of extraordinary opportunity to recognize the nature of mind.
You know, and also knowing, you know, remembering that, I mean, in the worst of cases, you know, like say if it's life and death, remembering, you know, that death isn't the opposite of life. Death is the opposite of birth. You know, but life is going on, and there's countless birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. And if it really comes that far, you know, that you experiencing maybe, you know, you can't breathe and you might die, then the best thing you can do is to try to not go into panic and just surrendering to the intelligence of the process, you know, which is going on since billions of years. You know, if you look just at this universe, it has its own intelligence, and we are part of it, and we can just That's what also the elements meditation helps us to consider ourselves more to be part of this huge, vast process, which has its own intelligence, and we can just surrender into it and take a ride, rather than always needing to drive ourselves. Just let it be. Allow yourself to be carried.
Yes, but let's say you are, most people are not Buddhist and don't have that training or perspective.
Yeah, that's why we do train. You can't have that training and perspective without training. You need to put in the hours, it's like anything. Right. If you want to learn how to play the piano, you need to put in the hours. If you learn how to die without fear, you have to put in the hours. It doesn't come, you just don't get it as a gift from somebody.
And it's not uniquely Buddhist.
No.
So, the word, I love that word, enriching. If you think of the years of hospice work that I did, it was enriching. It wasn't depleting in any way. And people would go into a coma and come out of a coma, and we didn't know what they were doing when they were in the coma, but we could see like a healing family relationship the moment before death, or a healing interpersonal relationship. There was I remember a man who was not fully alert and not fully conscious. He was hallucinating, but he kept wanting to hug people. And the people who knew him said that his life, he was like a CIA secret agent and had to keep himself closed off from everyone. So how can I say that his spiritual path wasn't operating when he was hallucinating? Because he changed from someone who had to keep himself hidden to someone who was reaching out to everyone who passed by. So we have such assumptions, and we witness when we work with people who are dying that there are myriad ways to complete the spiritual questions in life and find wise moments.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different traditions, Christian and Muslim and Buddhist, and they all help us to feel this sense of enrichment and belonging, and then that affords a letting go of grasping, and grasping is the recipe for suffering, as we know. And and there's so many different ways how that can be cultivated, and we are speaking here about the Buddhist way, which is one of many. Yeah.
I've had an experience that touches on this. My late husband passed away from lung cancer about 20 years ago, and he was mostly facing death without fear, but in his very last moments, he started to have a bit of panic. And so it was said to him, remember, God loves you.
Yeah.
And with that, he took a deep breath. And that was what he heard last. And he had stopped panicking. So
yeah.
And he wasn't particularly a trained Buddhist or any other faith.
But just being a good human being is, one doesn't have to have a denomination, really, and say I'm this or that. But it's more like, knowing that there's something bigger than oneself. That's like, the original meaning of the name religion means religare, to, being bound, being connected to something bigger than ourselves. And which denomination we choose, has a lot of different reasons. It's not that important, but it's that sense of not being a separate entity in a hostile universe, which when we die, then you could also say God loves you, it's the same thing. There's so many ways how we can express that, and from culture to culture, there have been different ways of speaking about emptiness, you could also say God loves you, yeah. The essence is kind of the same,
Joanne, you had your hand up too.
Yeah. So the purpose of my visit was I have a brother who's dying. He's not dying yet, but he is in hospice care. And when I left this time after being with him for 2 days, we left in a place of love. So I gave him a kiss on the head and I said, I love you. And he said, I love you. And I said, yeah, there's a big medicine in this world, isn't there, Don? And it's called love. And he said, yes. And then his final words to me before I left was, and laughter. So this time when I left with a smile on my face after this particular visit. And I'm just still holding that energy of love and laughter. And, you know, this whole morning of focusing on impermanence, you know, things are impermanent, aren't they? So thank you again, Khenmo and Ayya Santacitta for helping us realize impermanence this morning.
And Sarah, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I did. I really appreciate the discussion and meditations this morning. And I love when Anacita said that through the elements we can experience wisdom. That just opened up something for me. And I really appreciate the seeing how to meditate through the elements. So I love that. And another phrase that really stood out to me was birth is just a concept. That's really profound. And it hit me in a different way today. So I appreciate that. And then the other big takeaway for me today is to think of swapping the saran wrap for a net, because I've lived in a fairly tight bubble since March, when the pandemic really started here we were, had to close down in the US, and I've kept my bubble pretty tight. And it feels real uncomfortable to go out and to start having people in my home again. I'll be happy to see them, but all of a sudden I'm thinking, are we really safe? So I appreciate this idea of the net, because it's that permeability that that the saran wrap is just an illusion, that this bubble is just an illusion. And somehow that net is going to help me figure out how to be more and more open. So, I live in an area where people that are vaccinated are getting the virus. I've heard of 4 church members that went to church on the 4th of July and they've just tested positive. So that church is now going back to Zoom. So every day I hear of people that have the vaccine that are getting the virus, and it's scary. So I think this idea of the net and the construct of this bubble being deconstructed will help. So I appreciate that.
I was looking at the map, seeing, how your situation is in Arkansas. So we're thinking of everyone out there.
And I also wonder if it's a particular vaccine which.
No, it's the D variant. But what the doctors say is, although people are getting the virus, they don't need to be on respirators and they're not dying.
That's a good thing, yeah.
Yeah, but we have so many unvaccinated people. We have more unvaccinated people than we do vaccinated in our state. I think our state only has about 34% of vaccinated people.
Any other thoughts or reflections?
Carol?
This might sound very absurd, but maybe the delta variation is actually something that will help us realize that we can't go back to normal, that we really need to take on this problem, the problems that we've been that have been revealed to us that we have, and move forward in a completely different way. So the world works in strange ways, and this might be another gift of the virus.
Yeah, I certainly don't want cancer again, but I want to remember the lessons. So yeah,
I'm right there with you.
yeah.
Nancy.
Hello, thank you.
Nancy and John are.
Hi, thank you so much, both of you. I know I got so much out of it, and I know we all did, and your kindness is just endless. Thank you, and patience. And I just want to remind everyone that, as we know, all the programs we have at Vajra Dakini Nunnery is due to the generous donations of everyone. And we want to make it possible not only for us, but for everyone who gets good and fed up with samsara, and that they have a place to go. Thank you so much. Please, I didn't ask you, please donate, okay? Thank you very much. I know many of you do, and we all appreciate that, of course. Want to keep going. Thank you very much. Please donate.
And Nancy has put a link to help you donate in the chat room. So if you haven't noticed that yet, go have a look.
So we're coming up on the conclusion, and so I want to go to the Bodhichitta Prayer, and I'm going to put that in the chat room. Wrong thing. Where's the, okay. But I'm gonna have our choir sing it as well.
I've got one very quick thing.
Sure.
Okay, there's a story about when Gandhi was assassinated, that the folks around him heard the word Ram, 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 which I think tells me where his mind was, in the of acute pain. So I know how to do that without acute pain, but I'm not sure I can do it with acute pain. But I think that at the moment of death, it's all about surrender and faith and trust that you are the light. But anyway, so I you know, that death situation came up, and it comes up over and over and over again. And but I look to the saints and how they check out.
That's very good reminder. We look to Amitabha, Om Amidewa Hri, or Chenrezig, Om Mani Padme Hung, or however we see the perfected nature. So I put in the chat room the Bodhichitta Prayer. And let's see if I can put our choir up on the screen. Yes. And they're just finishing, well, I'll play the whole thing since we were just thinking of Amitabha, but they will also sing the Bodhichitta. our choir. Bodhichitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. So thank you so much, Ayya Santacitta. It's lovely to have you here, lovely to see everybody, and to take a little longer and really spend a little more time together and a more time discussing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, both of
Thank
you.
you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody. And don't forget to sign up for the sailboat. We did a test run yesterday, and they said they are so excited to have a silent sail. The boat people are looking forward to it as well.
But they have permission that they don't have to chat with people. They're really excited about it.
I understand that.
Take care and
Bye.
see you
Bye.
next
Bye. Bye.
Okay, so we